Welcome, everyone.
Hello.
Hi. For joining us today.
Good morning. Oh, good afternoon.
We're just going to give it another minute. Couple people signing in.
Good afternoon, Christian.
Hello.
This is William.
Hi, William. How are you?
Yeah, good to see you. Pretty good. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you too. Okay, everyone. Just a reminder to please put yourselves on mute as we get started. Thank you. Okay, we are at 19, Hali. So I think we're going to get started. If anyone else comes on, I'll allow them in. Welcome, everyone. We're glad you're able to join us today for our professional development workshop. I'd like to introduce Hali Massey. She will take it over from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So hello and welcome to this presentation on social emotional learning and culturally responsive teaching practices for the adult ESOL classroom. I know there's a lot of acronyms out there for what we do. I am going to try to consistently use ESOL because that is what my organization uses, but you know, this is English language learning, English language acquisition, ESL, all kind of the same thing. I wanted to start this presentation by establishing relevance for this topic. This topic is timely because COVID-19 research really has showed us that immigrant and minority populations have been disproportionately affected both in health and in economics by COVID. And this has really brought the conversation of learner mental health into the realm of adult ESOL education. And because of this impact, considering our learners' mental health is really more important than ever. And while I'm not going to present any of that specific COVID-19 research here, I do have references for that in the resource folder that is going to accompany this presentation. So you can kind of dig into that research a little bit more if you would like to. But I also feel like this topic is timeless for adult ESOL education because research also shows that these frameworks we're going to look at today support the social emotional well-being of adult learners, and that has a direct impact on learning outcomes and supports the goals of adult ESOL instruction, such as standards-based instruction, college and career readiness skills, and self-advocacy and independent learning skills. So for those reasons and many more, today we will look at activities that can be used in the adult ESOL classroom to integrate these frameworks into our instruction. These activities can be very beneficial, not only for our learners' learning process and experiences, but also for their personal well-being and growth. So to get started, I want to introduce myself, of course. My name is Hali Massey, and I'm the ESOL specialist at the Virginia Adult Learning Resource Center. So I'm coming to you from a neighboring state. I'm really excited to be able to network with practitioners from a different state, learn more about what you all are doing, and kind of share some of what we're doing. The organization I work for provides professional development and technical assistance for adult education programs in the state of Virginia. Part of our scope of work includes working with adult education instructors to understand what resources, training, and information that they need in order to meet their learners' needs, as well as meet state and federal adult education expectations. I'm the ESOL specialist, so most of my work is with ESOL instructors like yourselves in the state of Virginia, and again, providing support, sharing resources, doing online facilitated classes, and that kind of work. So my hope for today is that it is very interactive and that you all are able to really participate in the conversation and in the activities. So there are going to be several places during this presentation where I'll ask you to participate in these social emotional learning and culturally responsive activities. I want you all to be able to see these activities from the learner perspective, and the goal is that you'll be able to reflect on how these activities can benefit the learning process and what you might need to do to make these activities work for your learners. So to get started today, we're going to use an emotional check-in activity as our icebreaker. While we are going to talk in more depth about these activities later in the presentation, they are a fun and productive way to start off a class or a session like this. So for this activity, please choose the sheep image that best represents how you're feeling today about your adult ESOL work. If you would like to, you can also include why you're selecting that image. It's not necessary to give an explanation, but it does help to expand on this activity and to get to know more about each other. So basically, you just look at the images and see which one kind of best represents how you're feeling about your work today in this moment, and you just put that number in the chat box so we can see your
Haley, sorry to interrupt. We're just seeing the course objectives and purpose right now.
Oh, that's so weird. Okay, sorry. So do you see where it says my name there?
No, it's just the objectives and purpose.
I'm so sorry. Let me stop the share and restart because I don't know why that's doing that. I only have one screen, so it should. Do you see my name now?
I see your name now, yeah.
Okay, I apologize about that. I am not sure what the glitch was there. Okay, do you see the sheep now?
I see all the animals, yes.
Okay, yay. I was wondering, I was like, I don't see anything in the chat box yet. So now that you can see these images, you just kind of pick which one best represents again, how you're feeling today about your work. And then you just put that in the chat box. And like I said, if you'd like to give an explanation for why you're choosing that image, please feel free to do so. If you don't, then that's perfectly fine as well. If I was doing this, I might go with 2 today. I just got back from the beach after 2 relaxing days. So I feel pretty relaxed and, you know, it's summertime. So just sitting outside, soaking up the sun. Perfect, we're getting some responses. Oh, good, there's a few 2s. 7 is popular. Oh, you know, I really haven't had a lot of 7s in my other times I've used this, so that's kind of interesting. Does anyone who picked 7 want to come off mute and tell us why you chose that image? You don't have to. No. You can also put it in the chat if you want to.
This is Kathy, and I chose 7, and I guess I would say it's because looked to me like, you know, still trying to learn different techniques, learn options, and improve in my abilities as an instructor. So that's why number 7 worked for me.
Very cool. That's a really cool interpretation of that image. So thank you for sharing that. It's always so interesting to hear how people kind of interpret the images differently and associate different feelings with them. That's one of really the best parts about these activities, I think. Does anyone else want to come off mute and share a little bit about why they chose any image? I know we have some responses. 9, I'm feeling excited.
Yeah, I chose, this is David Strauss. I chose number 9 because to me that looked like a lot of excitement and joy. And I don't know, in my retirement years, the most exciting thing I've done is teach ESOL, and it continues to be exciting, even though there are times I don't feel all that well equipped. Personally, it's still very, very rewarding.
No, Elliot.
Great, David. Thank you so much for sharing. That's a really positive outlook. And I think that, you know, you're here, you're doing professional development. So yeah, we're not always perfect at what we do, but we, you know, as long as we're constantly learning new things, that's what matters. Great. So thank you all so much for participating in that. We're going to do one more kind of activity before we jump into the presentation. I'm just going to mute real fast. Okay. So yeah, before we jump into the rest of this content, I wanted to take some time to include a mindfulness activity. The purpose of this activity is to focus and kind of ready your mind for a learning experience. It helps to create space for you to process what's happening right now while leaving some of life's other distractions on the back burner. And just to double check, can everyone see the mindfulness slide? Is that good? Okay. So to get started with this activity, I would suggest, if you're able to turn off your camera. First step, I'm actually going to turn mine off as well, just so we can eliminate extra distractions. And then also, as we work through these first two steps, it is best if you're able to kind of close your eyes, again, to just eliminate extra distractions. But if you're not able to close your eyes, you can kind of just focus on kind of a single focal point, so you're eliminating those distractions. So for this activity, there are 3 steps. For each step, we will take about 30 seconds to focus. For step 1, you're going to focus on one thing that you smell in the space where you are. So you want to kind of try and clear your mind of any thoughts outside of that one smell. You can think about the smell, where it's coming from, what it is, but really just want to focus on that one thought for 30 seconds. Okay, now we're going to move to the second step. For this step, we want to focus on a single sound that we can hear in our space. Similar to the first step, you want to completely focus your thoughts on this one sound for 30 seconds. Okay, and for the final thought, we're going to go ahead and open our eyes if they were closed, and now focus on one thing we can see. It's best to choose something that perhaps you haven't noticed before in your space, or that you have not focused on before. Again, you just want to direct your thoughts to just this one thing that you're looking at. Okay, we can go ahead and come back. I hope you enjoyed that little mental break and were able to kind of focus your mind. Feel free to, come back on camera. I don't want to discourage camera use. It's just for that particular activity. I think it's nice to not be looking at a bunch of different faces. And I'd like to take a minute here to reflect on this activity. So I'm going to put up a few questions on the slide, and just think about those questions and put your responses in the chat box. The first reflection question I have is, how do you feel after this activity? What feelings do you have after doing that mindfulness activity? Centered, relaxed, good. Relieved, that's a good one. Aware. Good. Yeah, it's supposed to achieve that. So hopefully you're feeling some of those things after participating in that. Nostalgic. I like that's a really interesting response as well. So the next question I have is, how do you think your learners would feel? So if you did this activity in your class, what feelings do you think your learners might have? Confused, yes, good. I get that response a lot. Uh-huh, yeah, similar to your, yeah, I mean, hopefully, you know, in the end, they would have those same feelings of being centered and relaxed and that kind of thing. And then lastly, you know, how do you think your learners could use this activity in the classroom or even outside of the classroom? Mindfulness activities are great for stressful situations, you know, things we all encounter in our everyday lives. So how do you see your learners maybe using this in the classroom or out of the classroom to relax or stress? Yeah. Reflective. Yeah, we like to be very reflective. I don't know. I like that response. I'm going to talk about it a little bit. So hopefully you'll have a little bit more clarity on that as we go through this presentation. But yeah, before studying, before taking a test, anything that's kind of stressful or taxing, it is a very, yeah, it can be very challenging to convey to. By early learners, do you mean like lower level English language learners? If you want to clarify that, but yes, it's a challenging concept.
Yes, yes.
Okay, okay. I just wanted to make sure I was on the same page with you. And I know that's that is a concern that a lot of instructors have at the lower level. And we're going to talk about a few things that I think can help with that. But like a lot of things in ESL, repetition and routine are really important. So you can, you know, use those strategies with these activities as well. Okay, so just to kind of sum up on mindfulness and these activities, they do allow learners to focus and leave stress and responsibilities outside of the classroom. They do create an environment and conditions that will support the social emotional learning and culturally responsive teaching activities that we're going to talk about today. And they can be very vital towards working towards that growth mindset. In the resource folder that accompanies this presentation, there are other examples of mindfulness activities. There are a good amount of them out there for K through 12. Like a lot of resources, we kind of have to adapt for adult education, but it's definitely doable. And there's a lot of mindfulness activities out there for adults that you can kind of incorporate into your classroom as well. One thing I actually like to do with this that I didn't do today, just because kind of it's a little difficult to when you're presenting like this, but you can play some like calming background music as well, and that kind of helps to set the mood a little bit. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit later in the presentation, but you know, with adult education, the relevance and the why is very important to our learners. So being kind of explicit about why you're doing these activities is one way to kind of help with that confusion that might come from that. But also, you know, doing the activity and then having them reflect on it, I think can be helpful as well. At first, they might be like, what is this? This is not for the classroom. But after participating, hopefully they would be able to reflect and see the benefit of it. Okay. And I see there's a few things in the, okay. Yeah, making routine. Before we look at these activities, I did just want to give a little bit of background on these frameworks and where they're coming from. So the activities I'm going to share in this presentation are based on and they're rooted in these two frameworks, culturally responsive teaching and social emotional learning. While most of these activities are more directly related to social emotional learning, the Ready for Rigor framework that is presented in the culturally responsive teaching framework consists of 4 quadrants. And these activities really speak to 2 of those, which are building learning partnerships and community with your learners and building a learning environment. So both of those quadrants really involve getting to know your learners, and the social emotional learning activities are a strategy for doing that. Most research regarding social emotional learning is in regards to K through 12 learners. However, as we all know, adult learners are bringing so much to the classroom, from their funds of knowledge to their multiple life responsibilities. And social emotional learning really allows the learners to understand themselves and others better, to really communicate about emotions, attitudes, and opinions, and to work towards goal setting as well as college and career readiness skills. There is a good amount of research in especially one of the resources I'm going to share today that talks about how social emotional learning really supports middle school and high school students when they're trying to matriculate into higher education and community college. So I think a lot of that research can also be applied to our learners and how it can really support them in transitioning to other stages, whether it's career or education, or working towards their goals. And then, it's important to mention that just by implementing some of these activities in your classroom doesn't mean that these frameworks are being fully implemented. I heard it talked about in a presentation once of these frameworks are really a journey, not a destination. So the process of immersing your classroom in these frameworks is really long and involved, but using these activities with your learners is a good starting point. And at the end of this presentation, there are resources for each of these frameworks if you would like to dig deeper and work on more on fully implementing these frameworks in your classroom. Okay. So I did just want to kind of establish why we're looking at these frameworks for English language learners. It's important to look at how these frameworks can impact the learning outcomes and the learning goals that our learners have. It may seem overwhelming to focus on several different theoretical frameworks. So I know I've talked about social emotional learning, culturally responsive teaching, mindfulness. That sounds like a lot, and I definitely understand that. However, all three of these that are included in this presentation really work well in conjunction with one another and usually support each other in accomplishing learner and classroom goals. And these activities have been found to reduce anxiety, which in return allows learners to ready and focus their minds for learning and creates a safe learning environment. So these are the three types of activities that we're going to look at today. I'm going to show some of these activities, but again, I'm going to ask you all to participate in them as well. I'm going to use a few different technology tools, and I will try and provide as much guidance and support with that as possible. Also, because we are in a virtual environment, I'm going to demonstrate using these activities virtually. However, with a few minor adaptations, they should be successful in the face-to-face classroom as well. I also want to acknowledge that this may be a new topic of conversation with our learners, as we kind of mentioned when we were reflecting on that mindfulness activity. And I do understand that there will be pre-teaching and scaffolds, modeling, and adaptations that will need to be in place in order to make these activities successful in your classroom. And we'll touch on that towards the end of the presentation as well. Also, as we move through these activities, please feel free to put questions in the chat box that you might have at any point. I will address them at the end of the presentation altogether. In addition, please feel free to add your ideas and experiences on using these activities with your adult learners. So if there's something I talk about that you've already done or done, something similar to that, please share that. I want to get your all experience and feedback as much as possible. Okay. So we're going to start by looking at the growth mindset prompts and the empathy task cards today. But before we look at those, I just wanted to mention some strategies for integrating these activities into your classroom. It's important to note that these activities should not be seen as something extra that needs to be done in the classroom. When using these activities, it's important to integrate your classroom content into them. That means using target vocabulary, themes, and/or grammar in the activities. This will help to create relevance for these activities, and it will give learners the opportunity to connect these activities with language and situations that they will encounter outside of the classroom. In addition, it's important to integrate these activities into your classroom routine, which I kind of already mentioned. And the more learners see these activities, the more they will come to expect them and feel comfortable with them. I think we've probably all experienced doing something new in the classroom and learners don't seem receptive to it, or it doesn't go well, but we kind of reflect on it and we make some adaptations, and the next time it just gets better and better and easier. So kind of the same idea here. As we look at some examples, we'll talk more about how these activities can be used in the classroom. However, these two are very flexible and adaptable. Some ways to integrate these activities into your classroom routine include using these activities as a warm-up to activate background knowledge on the topic or the content that will be covered in class. These activities can also be used as a jumping off point for dialogues, role plays, and other extension activities where learners are able to not only identify their emotions or opinions within a situation, but they're also able to practice applying that emotion or opinion and target language during authentic language practice. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways. And one thing you'll see from these as well is you can also end up with some student generated content from these activities that you can then use for other activities in your classroom. Okay, so we're going to get started with the growth mindset prompts. And these are used to give learners the opportunity to reflect on what they've done in life, the experiences that they have had, and how those can be applied towards working on their current goals. These prompts give learners the opportunity to really consider what their own strengths and capabilities are in hopes that these activities will help move learners towards having a growth mindset. If you would like to explore the idea more of growth mindset, there are some resources that I provide at the end of the presentation. So first I'm going to show, and before I get started, I just want to say you'll have access to all of these activities in a Google Drive at the end. And so you can adapt them, make them your own. They are going to be in view only, but you can make a copy of them and then they're yours and you can, make them work for your classroom. So I'm going to start with a Google slide presentation that I put together with some of these prompts. The basic structure of the growth mindset prompt is that you provide a situation, like I mentioned, that allows learners to reflect on experiences that they've had, especially experiences where they've had to apply skills and apply knowledge. For example, with this slide, talk about a time that you were lost. When you're lost, you have to do something to get unlost. So it kind of has learners reflecting on what skills they used in that situation to kind of overcome that problem. Also, this is something that most adults have experienced at some point in their life, which is also important. You want to try to make it as relevant as possible to your learners. So you kind of present that situation, and it's always good to have an image that kind of scaffolds that situation as well. Going back to the lower level ESOL classes, images are really important to help learners kind of connect the words with the idea. And then once you kind of present that situation, you want to present kind of a reflection question on it that, again, has them think about what they did, what they accomplished, what skills they used. And so that's kind of the structure of the growth mindset prompt. There's a few different ways you could use this. And I'm going to actually show you one way using the annotate feature in Zoom. So I'm going to go ahead and present this. And the way that I have the animation set up is the first thing you see is the image. So you can talk to the students about the image. What do you see? What does the green check mark mean? What does the red X mean? What, kind of talk about the image. And then you would present, that question or that scenario that you're going to ask them to think about. So for this one, what is a mistake that you have made? Mistake could be a challenging word, so you may have to kind of explain that or model that depending on the level of your learner. Or if you've, obviously, if you've already talked about this topic in your class, you might not have to do that. So you present that first question, and then you're going to have a box here. And this is the box where your students can put their responses to the question using the annotate feature. New tech tools are, you have to teach them to learners. So that is something you would have to think about is how are you going to explain how to use the annotate feature. Also, I always say if you can't use the annotate, feel free to put your response in the chat box, and that does give the learner some options if they're on a device where annotation is challenging. So I'm going to start by modeling this. So I'm going to say, what is a mistake that I made? So I'm going to choose the annotate feature, and I'm going to type my text here, late to work. So my mistake, I was late to work. And I just, leave that in the box. Now, can everyone see that in the box? So now I'm going to ask you all to try and use that annotate feature. So if you go up to or go down to your bar where you see, your video and your mute and those different options, you should see a button that says annotate. Or if you go to more, where the 3 dots are, it may be there as well. Perfect. Yeah, Amy was able to get it in there. Very cool. You're able to get. I know it's a new tool for people. So if another option, like I said, you can put it in the chat box if you're not able to get to that annotate feature. Amy, do you want to, I don't know if you'd mind coming off mute and telling us how you got to your annotate feature?
Okay, because I had to teach this with my ESL students and they're high intermediate. So go to view options right next to the green bar at the top of your screen. View options, scroll down to where it says annotate and click on annotate, and you'll see a menu where you can choose text and click on text, and then you can start typing once you click on the box. So once you have that going, you should have that shown in the box. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know it's different depending on what version of Zoom you're using too. So it's good to have different, perspectives on how to get to something. So thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
And again, like I said, you can feel free to put things in the chat. If you do have learners putting things in the chat box, you can actually type it on the screen so that it still shows up, in the annotate feature for everyone to see. Perfect. So we have some good examples there. So once you get examples into that box, and sometimes this happens, you'll see how you kind of have to drag your box so it's not overlapping with someone else's text. So once you have some responses there for that question, then you would have that second question come up of what did you learn? So you made a mistake. So I was late to work, my mistake. What did I learn? So again, you have this white box here. I'm going to go back to that annotate feature and select text. And I'm going to type set my alarm clock. Okay, so I was late to work, my mistake. So I learned every evening to set my alarm clock. That's my lesson that I learned. So then again, if you all want to go into that box and then put the lesson that you learned from your mistake, you can go ahead and put that into that box down there. So I'm actually adding William's response from the chat there, so we can see it up here. Cool, we're getting lots of responses. So you'll see what you have here is some student-generated work, which is really cool. The other thing you can see from my perspective is I can also see who's typing what, which is also really helpful to kind of gauge who's engaged and who's interacting with the lesson, which is nice. So then once you've done the growth mindset prompt, You could use some of these scenarios to have students go off and create role plays about these scenarios. You could have them write stories about these scenarios. So, you can use them for other activities in your classroom. You could just provide this as a screenshot or save it as a PDF for your learners. So they have some new vocabulary maybe to work with. So that's what I really like about it, is you get this new content that you can use in various ways. And you want to not just stop here, you want to build on these activities. So that is an example. I'm going to go ahead and clear the annotations. So that's an example of how you could use this in the virtual classroom. Like Amy touched on, you do have to, teach your learners that annotation tool. But there's other ways you could just, I'm going to go back, get out of this. You could just kind of present this as a slide and just have a whole group discussion. You can have students put responses into the chat box, or you can have them come off mute. You could have them go into breakout rooms and talk in small groups about these. So definitely, a lot of options. And if you're in the face-to-face classroom, similarly, you could use this. It's just a Google slide deck. So you can present that to the whole class. You can have a whole group conversation. Again, you could use small groups if you wanted to do it that way. I don't know if anyone else has any other ideas for the virtual class or the face-to-face class. You can feel free to put those in the chat box as well. Yeah. So like the real life classroom, if you have the technology to use a presentation like this, I think that's a great way to go. I also think sticky notes are really cool too. You could do a graphic organizer and have students work in small groups and kind of fill out their responses to the questions that way. Again, if anyone else has any other ideas, the basic tenets of this is you present the situation and then you have the learner reflect on what they did in that situation. You could do that in a variety of ways, but that's the basic structure of this. Sorry, to get out of this again. Okay. I also have this in a Jamboard, an example in a Jamboard. And because of time, I'm not going to have us interact with this one, just so we can make sure we get on to the other ones. But I will put a link in the chat box so you can kind of go in there later and see what that looks like. But basically, I just put the same prompts into a Jamboard, and your learners can add text to the Jamboard. They can add images. So again, for low-level learners, it may be easier for them to add an image to the Jamboard than it is for them to add text. So that's another option there for the Jamboard. Does anyone have experience with Jamboard? No, this is a new tool. It's really fun. It's a really good tool. I can just give you an example. So you have the sticky note here. And so this says, when did you finish a difficult task? Maybe I got a new job, right? I was looking for a job and I accomplished that and I got a new job. So they would add their response here, just like that. And then how did you feel after you accomplished this task? Again, just add a sticky note and say, excited. And then you have that. So that's kind of how Jamboard works. So those are a different option. And again, this is where you can really see how the sticky notes would work in the real life classroom, because this is kind of a representation of that, just in virtual world. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about, oh, Sylvia's used Jamboard, yeah. Does anyone have any questions about the growth mindset prompts? I'm going to go ahead and go on to the empathy task cards, but if you do have any questions, again, please put those in the chat and we will talk about them. So the empathy task cards, the structure is very similar. I'm just going to show you the Google slide really quickly. It looks very similar to what we just looked at, but it's a little bit different in that the empathy task card is really having learners think about other people and how they would feel in situations, how they would react to someone feeling a certain way. So it's kind of outside of themselves, whereas the growth mindset prompts are really having them reflect on their own skills and knowledge. This is having them reflect on how other people might feel. So really building empathy and being able to talk about feelings and opinions and how to react in situations, and that kind of thing. And again, you're going to kind of present a scenario. So in this situation, David is new to the city, and then you're going to present some opportunities for learners to reflect on that situation and really identify the feelings that might be associated with the situation and how they would react to that. Again, you can really use the content from your classroom here. So, usually ESL textbooks have a unit on housing. And so this could be a good one for that, or they have usually units on like community and community resources. So this could be a good one for that. Again, I tried to, put in here situations that learners would be familiar with, that are relevant for adult learners. And also just thinking about differentiating your language as well. So, for this example, I tried to use fairly low-level language here so that this could be done with low-level learners. However, you may want to, like this highlighted question here would be kind of a way to level that up. So if you have a multi-level class, you may want to think about offering questions that are going to be challenging at different levels. You may just want to say, if you can, respond to this other question, or if you would like to, just kind of giving that option for something that's more advanced. So I have a Mentimeter version of this, and I thought this would be kind of a fun way to interact with this one. So I'm going to give you all the instructions. So to interact with this Mentimeter, you're going to go to menti.com, and you would enter in that code, and you can do this on your cell phone. You can do this in a separate browser on your computer. You can also, with your cell phone, if you hold your camera up to the QR code, it'll open the link for you as well. So there's a few different options for getting in there. And Christine did put the URL as well as the code in the chat box also. So I'll give you all a minute. I like using Menti on my phone because I can focus on my computer, and then I can use my phone for Menti. That's just my personal preference, but it works on any device. Okay. So our first slide in Menti is just going to be that same slide you saw in the Google slide presentation, where it just presents that situation. So David is new to this city. We have the image here. You can talk about the image, ask the learners what they see, what's happening, kind of just start getting them thinking about this situation. And then the first question is, how do you think he feels? So David is new to the city. What feelings might David have? So I'm going to go ahead and move on to this. Oh yeah, we have responses already. So you guys are putting in your responses of how do you think David feels when he's new to the city. One way to kind of scaffold this for lower levels is to provide some sort of word bank for this, and they can just type in, the emotion. So they don't have to think of all the emotions themselves. You would have some options there for them. One way to kind of scaffold a little bit with this. Good. And the good thing with Menti is you'll see excited is really big. That means that excited has been entered the most times. So you can get a feeling for what most people are thinking or feeling, and what answers are not as common. So that might also clue you into what vocabulary might be unfamiliar to some of your learners. So for example, anxious here is pretty small. So maybe only 1 or 2 people put anxious. So you may want to talk about that vocabulary word. and make sure, everyone is familiar with it. This is a great vocabulary bank that you can use for other activities as well. So once you get some responses in there for how David feels, the next slide is going to say, what can you do to welcome David? So David's new to the city. What can you do to help David feel more welcome in the community? So for this one, you can, so for this one, it's a little bit different. It's not the word cloud. This one is just, you just type in your response to the open-ended question. Perfect. Help him unload the truck, introduce yourself, invite him for coffee. Very good. Okay, yeah. So we have some good responses there. So again, this would be a really good way to kind of jump into a dialogue. So for example, okay, tell him where to shop for food. Group A is going to create a dialogue where you explain to David how to shop for food. So you can kind of build on these activities a bit, which is nice. Something I really like about Mentimeter also is you can download these into PDFs. So you can download this and give it to your learners as well. So they have it as kind of a resource for new vocabulary or thinking about these topics. It's something you can reuse, which is nice. Yeah, everyone loves pie, right? Perfect. Okay. So that is kind of how the empathy task card works. Similarly to how we talked about growth mindset in the face-to-face classroom, empathy task cards could be done in a very similar way. Mentimeter is also something you can use in the face-to-face classroom if your learners have a cell phone or a Chromebook or a laptop. And if not everyone has one, they could work in groups to respond to that. So it's a good digital literacy tool that can easily be integrated into the face-to-face classroom if technology is available. Okay, so before we go on to the emotional check-ins, does anyone have anything they want to share about the growth mindset prompts and the empathy task cards? Any questions, points of clarification? We're doing okay? Okay. Just want to make sure I included everything. Sylvia, you have a question? Or you're just saying yes to pie. It's also a possibility. Okay. So we will go on to the emotional check-ins. So the emotional check-ins, like we saw at the beginning of this presentation, work well at the beginning of a class. It's a good chance for learners to share what's going on in their lives. This creates community in the classroom and an opportunity for learners to get to know each other and for you to get to know your learners better as well. However, these activities don't just have to be used at the beginning of a class. They can kind of be scattered throughout a class. You may want to ask learners how they're feeling about a specific topic that you're teaching or practicing in class. So for example, if you just taught count and uncount nouns, right? And you want to get an idea, do your learners feel comfortable with this topic? Do they feel, are they ready to move on? Do they need more information? You can kind of use an emotional check-in for that to gauge how they're feeling about that as well. And then finally, you can also use these at the end of a class to kind of see, just reflecting on the class in general and how learners are feeling about their progress or about something you did specifically that day. It's also kind of, I don't know if anyone uses exit tickets, but this is also something you could incorporate into an exit ticket also. Most likely it's going to take time for learners to get accustomed to participating in these activities. Some strategies for working towards full participation are to start with making these activities anonymous. I know the one we did today, at the beginning, I asked you to enter your responses in the chat box, so that wasn't anonymous. However, if you use a Jamboard, like we looked at before, that can be anonymous. If you're in the face-to-face classroom, you can kind of keep it anonymous that way as well. But just keeping it anonymous helps learners to feel a little bit more comfortable opening up. And then also, give the option for learners to share an explanation for their emotion, much like I did at the beginning. I said, if you feel comfortable, if you would like to provide an explanation, do that, but we don't have to necessarily press learners at first. They may not, feel comfortable with that, and that may take a little bit of time. You also may want to just start with a few simple emotions and kind of work towards incorporating new, more nuanced emotions later once learners seem comfortable with these activities. And another suggestion is to find less explicit ways for learners to represent how they're feeling. So for example, today, I didn't really ask you to give us an emotion. I just asked you to say which image represented your emotion. That's a little bit less threatening than tell me how you're feeling, like a therapy session. So you can kind of find ways like that to make it less explicit. So we already kind of participated in one of these today, so I'm just going to show you a few examples that I also have. So So this first one here is pretty scaffolded. So this would be something I would recommend using at the beginning when you're introducing this activity to your learners, as well as if you're working with the lower level ESL class. It has that "how are you today" question, and then it presents the images and the vocabulary words, so they can kind of connect the image to the word. And then it also has those sentence stems there so that they kind of have a good idea of how to respond to this question. So you would model this, of course, and you would say, today I am confused, or I am feeling excited. So you can kind of model that for learners. One thing that is part of culturally responsive teaching is selective vulnerability on the part of the instructor. So, we also have to be vulnerable in these situations ourselves. So if you feel comfortable, I would definitely recommend, explaining to the learner why you're choosing your emotion. That kind of helps them feel more comfortable talking about their emotions. The other example I have here is less scaffolded. It just has the images. One suggestion is coming to some sort of agreement as a class as far as, what does this first emoji mean? What emotion is that? In the resource folder, I have a Google form activity where it shows the emoji, and then learners choose which emotion they think that emoji represents. So you could kind of do that as a class and come to a consensus on what these images are representing. It's also just a good way of reflecting on feelings. And then finally, I have the one we used today there as well, if you want to use that. Some less explicit options. One is an emotional weather report, which I thought was a really fun way of thinking about your emotions. So basically, you would just ask learners, okay, based on how you're feeling today, what weather would that look like? What would that weather look like outside? So for example, I could say, maybe I have this picture of like a crisp autumn morning. So to me, that's like excited, fresh beginning. I'm feeling, maybe I have something new going on in my life and I'm excited about that. But this is really interesting because learners will interpret, this differently. So for example, maybe for someone like a snowy evening would be comfortable and cozy, but for someone else that might be cold and dark, that might be a negative emotion. So it can be a really good way of having learners think about how people perceive things differently, how emotions are represented within ourselves differently. Just a good way of thinking about different perspectives as well. So that's that one. And then the other one I have in here is this. It's also a Jamboard. It's fist to 5, or no, fist to 5 activity. So basically you're just having learners say how they're feeling with, fingers. So you have 1 finger, 2 fingers, 3 fingers, 4 fingers, 5 fingers. And each learner would have, what you would do is you would go in here and create a sticky note with each learner's name on it. So when the learner goes into the Jamboard, they just drag their name to how they're feeling, right? So 5 being amazing and fantastic, and 1 being, not great, pretty terrible. And again, you could have them reflect on, go back to that example of count, non-count nouns. How are you feeling about using count and non-count nouns, right? And so you can get an idea of who's where and who needs more support and that kind of thing. You could also keep this anonymous and just have sticky notes and not have any names. So you would still get a sense of, okay, most learners are feeling good or most learners are not feeling good. But again, you're keeping that anonymous so they do feel as comfortable as possible interacting with this activity. And there are some other examples of emotional check-ins in the resource folder that I'm providing as well. I just wanted to show you a few different ones. Okay, so I'm running a little late today. Sorry, I apologize about that. But I did want to give you all an opportunity to kind of reflect on this. I know it's a lot of information that I presented, a lot of different activities and some different tech tools. So there's a lot going on there. But, using the chat box, I just want to hear from you all how you're feeling about these activities. What would you need to do to successfully integrate them? Thinking about what needs to be pre-taught, what scaffolds you might need, what materials you might need. I just want to kind of hear how you're feeling about this. So please feel free to put that in the chat box. Or if you would like to come off mute and share some reflections or some thoughts, that is welcomed as well. Yeah, it's a big topic, yes. So having multiple sessions is a good idea. All of these apps, I would say, are fairly easy to access. They can be accessed on pretty much any device, and they're free. And there's a lot of like YouTube tutorials you can find on these. There's some in other languages you can find for your learners. I definitely recommend trying to orient your learners on tools before you use them and not overloading them. So I know I kind of overloaded you today, but what I would recommend is trying one tool and then using it. And then, maybe once they're comfortable, you can use another tool. I just wanted to kind of show some different options for tools. So yeah, I definitely understand the technology concern. And again, because we're virtual, that's kind of what I did for this. But I definitely think, using graphic organizers in the classroom, whole group conversation, small group conversation. Something else I would recommend is Mood Meter, which is in the resources I provide. There's a different presentation on SEL that's in there. And the slides have some information on Mood Meter, which you could actually print. It's a chart that you could print out and use with learners that has a bunch of different emotions on it. You could also print the emojis. And trying to see some of the other. So with the clip art, I use Free Picks, which is actually referenced at the end of my presentation. So I am giving them credit for that. That's where I get a lot of my images from. And I try to use diversity in my images, try to look for images that are going to represent my learners. and also that are adult relevant, because that can, you know, a lot of images can be more relevant for like K through 12. Okay. Perfect. Yes, definitely a lot to take in. I definitely suggest going through the Google. So I'm going to go to that slide. So I have a QR code here for my Google Drive. So you can scan that with your phone and get a link to that. But I'm also going to put the link in the chat. And I believe that Christine will be sending this to you all as well in an email.
Correct. Yes, I'll be sending any resources, links to this, as well as the recorded session.
So my advice would be really to look through these resources, think about ways to integrate these into your classroom using, you know, vocabulary and grammar that your learners are already familiar with, or that you're already, you know, tackling in your classroom. Again, I don't want this to seem like something extra you have to do. It should be something that's supporting the content and the learning that your learners are already participating in. And I did kind of skip over this last slide, but you'll have access to this too. These are just some best practices for implementation. I've talked about a lot of them in the presentation, but just kind of wanted to sum up there. Yeah, I think that's it.
Great. Thank you so much, Haley. Again, everyone will be sending you links to all of this information as well as the recorded session. In the chat, I've placed a link to a survey. If you could please complete it, we'd appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great summer.
Thank you. You too.